of the Astana process, but it's obvious that the kind of Geneva process has lost its way as well.
Well, the Geneva process hasn't lost its way, and here's why. There are so many countries who have signed on to the Geneva process.
But the Geneva process is something like in terms of working towards a political transition, specifically in terms of trying to negotiate some kind of ceasefire or some kind of new de-escalation zone. Specifically, what is the Secretary doing to try and alleviate the situation?
Well, first I can tell you we have regular meetings in Jordan and with the Jordanians as we review our ceasefire zone in southwestern Syria. Remember, that's the one that's worked. That's the one that the United States put together with the Jordanians and a handful of other countries on this de-escalation zone, ceasefire zone. That's held since July. Okay, that is a terrific model. If we could get that model elsewhere in other parts of the country, we not only think that that would save lives, but help bring in humanitarian aid and help to better settle the situation. That's one of the things we need to do. The Secretary just had a meeting, of course, with the Turks, as you well know. The Secretary has meetings and conversations with many of our partners and allies all around the world to discuss this situation.
But specifically, when it came time, when we were talking in terms of Aleppo, a lot of the negotiations were between the State Department and the Russians. And, I know there's a new Secretary of State, but, specifically the Russians are the ones that not only are in some ways, parties to what's going on there, but also
conversations with the Russian government and reach out to the Russian government to implore them to stop enabling the Syrian regime to do what it's doing to its own people. Is Russia listening? I'm not sure that they are. But I would encourage each of you to ask Russia, take these questions to Vladimir Putin, take these questions to RT, to Sputnik, ask them those very questions. What are they doing to stop the devastation, the deaths, and the murders that are taking place in Syria? I'd be curious to hear their answers. They could do a lot more. They certainly bear a unique responsibility. We'd like to see them do more.
Well, are you considering any more action at the UN Security Council? I mean, what is the, diplomatic path forward in terms of trying to negotiate an end to this? Because whether the Russians are, a party to it or they're just supporting the Syrians, clearly they're the power brokers in terms of the influence.
Well, they have their weapons. They have their personnel down there that are participating in this. I have a list of 11 UN actions that Russia has blocked, specifically on Syria. Right here, I'd be happy to share a copy with all of you. Russia needs to cut this out. The Secretary has made that clear. The Secretary put out a statement. The White House put a statement out just last night on this. This is something we are following carefully. Russia needs to step up. Russia needs to cut it out.
I hear you, but beyond kind of statements and, asking them, is the Secretary going to go meet with Foreign Minister Lavrov and try and negotiate something? I mean, we saw with Secretary Kerry, a lot of those efforts, did not bear fruit, but there was a hearty effort in terms of trying to
I don't think
negotiate.
That anyone could argue that we have not made very strong efforts, stronger efforts, many would argue, than the previous administration on the issue of dealing with Syria. And that is, we've talked about that many times before. So the Secretary is fully committed to this. This is something that he is highly focused on, and the conversations and the diplomatic discussions will not stop. But I'm not going to be able to read out every single diplomatic discussion or conversation that takes place.
Well, could you can you at least, characterize what his discussions with Foreign Minister Lavrov in the last week have been on this issue?
Elise, I'm not going to pin the Secretary down to reading out all of the diplomatic conversations.
Well, is he talking to the Russian Foreign Minister about it?
We are having lots of conversations with many other countries. We are calling out Russia for its responsibility that it has. I would encourage you to also ask these very same questions of the Russian government. What is it doing to try to prevent the deaths of civilians in Syria? The Secretary is committed to this, and I'm just going to leave it at that.
Well, if you could take the question, because
I'm sorry, what is the question?
The question is specifically, what are the discussions with the Russians right now about trying to negotiate an end to this? Because I'm not saying I'm
not sure that they are, based on their actions, I don't think that they appear to be interested in ending this. However, I will go back and point to the president and Vladimir Putin's joint statement that they put out in Vietnam late last year, and that is where they agreed to the Geneva process. Let me go back and quote some of this for you as soon as I can find it. The presidents agreed that there is no military solution to the conflict in Syria. They confirmed that the ultimate political solution to the conflict must be forged through the Geneva process pursuant to UNSCR 2254. They also took note of President Assad's recent commitment to the Geneva process and constitutional reform and elections as called for under UNSCR 2254. Okay, those are commitments that the Russians made. They've not lived up to those commitments.
Okay, the question, if you could take it, is beyond, having conversations with partners and allies, specifically what is being done today.
Elise, I'm not going to have an answer for you on that because the secretary continues to have conversations. Some of those are private diplomatic conversations with the Russian government and with other governments as well. That is my answer. Okay. Anything else on this issue?
The previous administration also tried this tactic of calling Russia out and saying they're on the wrong side of history, they're not doing anything, and it had zero impact. In fact, when it started in 2014 or even earlier, it turned into a full-scale military operation from Russia in 2015, as you noted. So, what makes you think this time this administration's calling out of Russia is going to make the situation any better?
Matt, I don't know what some of you expect us to do. We have a full range of options through the interagency that are available to us if we want to or if we should need to use those. Our best tool, what we do out of this building, is an attempt at diplomacy, an attempt to shine a spotlight on things that are taking place around the world. That's what I'm doing. That's what many of my colleagues are doing all around the globe right now. We will continue to do that. We will continue to take action at the UN Security Council. We will continue to have our people there on the ground, frankly. We have Americans who are there who are assisting Syrians try to get back to a normal life. I don't know what more you expect us to do. You have seen this government, this administration, go hard after ISIS. They have done that at a level that the previous administration did not do. We are succeeding there in the fight against ISIS, okay? And that is the whole reason why we're there. And then there's this other issue,
No,
right?
That's not the whole reason why this conflict started. I'm sorry.
No, I said the reason we are there is to defeat ISIS. That is the reason that U.S. forces are there. That is the U.S. government policy. You may disagree with that, but that is what our policy is. We're there to defeat ISIS. Okay?
No one's saying that you didn't make significant efforts and progress even in defeating ISIS. The question on the table is, what are the diplomatic efforts that this administration
just described?
You haven't. I'm sorry.
I'm
you
sorry
haven't
you
described.
disagree with me. Okay, I would encourage you to go talk to the Russian government and see what they're trying to do to save some lives.
Heather, can I just turn that just flip it slightly? If the U.S. mission is to defeat ISIS, is that another way of saying it's not the mission to deal with the violence and that this is Russia's responsibility?
No, Russia has a unique responsibility.
But
Russia
does the
has
US
a unique
have
responsibility when Russia has air assets
right
in the air.
Does the U.S.
when
see it as
Russia
part of
is
its mission?
bolstering the government of Bashar al-Assad, they have a responsibility. We are not providing weapons and material to the government of Bashar al-Assad. We are not aiding in the killing of innocent civilians as Bashar al-Assad is doing.
Does the
Our
U.S.
forces are
think it
there
has a
in the east, and
responsibility
our
to help
forces
ease
are
the
fighting
violence?
ISIS.
Does the U.S. feel like it has a responsibility to help ease the violence and what's happening in East Ghouta? Is that seen as part of the mission?
Some of these things are things that we will not be able to talk about, okay? Some of these things will become intelligence matters and other issues as well.
Sounds like
Okay.
a no.
Pardon me?
That
No,
sounds like a
you
no.
cannot take that as a no. You cannot take that as a no.
Thank you.
Okay? Go ahead.
Last week I asked you, I'm sorry, I
Okay,
asked
go
you
right
whether or
ahead.
not you
Go-
had a
Connor, hold
responsibility
on.
to
Go-
protect
Connor,
civilians
excuse
in
me.
Syria, though.
Excuse me, go ahead.
I'm sorry. Paul from AFP. You said that we have a whole range of options, and then you said, I don't know what else you expect us to do.
Mhm.
So those don't square up, and there's like 400 people who have been bombed, who've been killed over the past few
Yeah,
days.
we do have
And
a range of options.
What are
but
those
when I
range of
say-
options,
hold on,
or what can
hold
you
on.
do?
When I say I don't know what you expect us to do, I don't know what you expect me to do here from this podium. Stop.
Like efforts are.
Elise, and some of these are private diplomatic conversations, okay? I'm not enough of this already because I already said UN Security Council resolutions. I've detailed those. I've detailed some of the conversations we've had with other governments. I've detailed our statements that we have provided, not just here at the State Department, but also the White House as well. So we are fully engaged. We have, as you know, a very large government with a lot of various departments, and we have a full range of options before us and ahead of us that we can use. It is not my position, not my role to be able to say what we will do. Some of those can be defined by other agencies that I can't speak to.
Okay, can I follow that up? Can you give us any information about whether there's a possibility at the UN to reach a ceasefire? What the Russians
I certainly hope there would be.
But what are the Russians asking?